Asbestos used to mean safety and security, thanks to its nearly indestructible fire-resistant fibers. These fibers mix easily with a wide variety of other materials and can even be woven into cloth. This makes asbestos a tough, lightweight, and very useful material. In fact, asbestos was once known as the material of 1,000 uses. Its electrical non-conductivity and acid resistance made it a common ingredient in many industrial applications. It was also widely used as building materials in theaters, homes, offices, and public buildings across the country. But in recent years, exposure to asbestos fibers beyond permissible exposure limits has been found to cause chronic and often fatal lung diseases, including asbestosis and certain forms of lung cancer. Because of serious health hazards, any material containing more than 1% asbestos is now regulated by the federal government through the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Department of Transportation, DOT, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. OSHA standards cover workers like you who may come in contact with asbestos-containing materials in buildings. These workers include maintenance and custodial staff, outside housekeeping services, trade contractors such as electricians, plumbers, and heating and air conditioning workers. It's important to understand that the mere presence of asbestos doesn't necessarily make a building dangerous. If installed asbestos stays where it belongs, undisturbed, you don't have to worry about being exposed. So when does asbestos become dangerous? And how do you know if you're at risk? This video explains what asbestos is and how it affects you. It explains forms of asbestos and its use in buildings, health effects of fiber exposure, possible locations of asbestos-containing building materials, recognizing damaged or deteriorating asbestos products, and housekeeping requirements. Asbestos is the name for a family of minerals mined throughout the world. Asbestos is a combination of magnesium, silicon, and other elements that share one important characteristic. They're all made up of tiny, hollow fibers. The forms of asbestos covered by OSHA standards are chrysotile or white asbestos, amosite or brown asbestos, chrysotile or blue asbestos, and compounds of asbestiform minerals that bond chemically with asbestos. White asbestos is the most common. In the past, it was widely used as insulation, fireproofing, soundproofing, and in many building materials. Brown asbestos was once bonded with asphalt and vinyl to make fire-resistant flooring, and is still used in high-friction applications such as automobile brake shoes and clutches. Blue asbestos and asbestiform compounds are uncommon. Historically, asbestos surfacing material was used for decoration and acoustics in buildings. Later, it was used as an insulation coating on structural steel for fire protection. Over the years, asbestos products have been sprayed, troweled, and painted on ceilings and other surfaces, and wrapped around pipes in buildings all over the country. In 1984, more than 25% of our residential, commercial, and public buildings nationwide had asbestos-containing surfacing material on the ceilings and walls. Nearly 75% had asbestos-containing pipe and duct insulation, an area now regulated by OSHA under the category of Thermal System Insulation, or TSI. Unfortunately, many of these asbestos materials have been damaged, resulting in potential health hazards. The tiny indestructible fibers that make asbestos so useful are what also make it dangerous. When installed, asbestos products are damaged or disturbed. Fibers escape from their bonding material, or matrix. Once loose, these fibers can break down into microscopic particles as small as 5 microns that are 5/1,000,000th of a meter in length. They float undetected through the air. If asbestos fibers are allowed to become airborne, air currents can move and spread them throughout a work area. Workers without approved air-purifying respirators can inhale these fibers into their respiratory systems. Many inhaled fibers are trapped in the nose and throat, but others make their way deep into the lungs. Here they enter the millions of tiny air sacs called alveoli. The alveoli are surrounded by tiny blood vessels called capillaries, which are separated from the inhaled air by a thin membrane. The function of alveoli is oxygenation of the blood and removal of carbon dioxide. As each breath of air is inhaled, oxygen is absorbed through the alveoli membranes into the blood. At the same time, carbon dioxide passes from the blood through the membrane and is then exhaled. It is here in the thin, soft alveoli walls that asbestos fibers do damage. Over time, scar tissue builds, causing the walls to thicken. Eventually, the ability of the affected alveoli to transfer oxygen and carbon dioxide through the walls is decreased or stopped altogether. A person's ability to breathe begins to decrease. The condition is called asbestosis. As the condition worsens, oxygen starvation sets in. Severe physical disability or even death may eventually result. If a person also smokes cigarettes, the problem becomes more severe. As cigarette smoke moves down into the lungs, it passes through the bronchioles, small tubes that lead to the alveoli. Here, both cigarette smoke and asbestos fibers can badly irritate tissues of the bronchial wall. While damage from cigarette smoking alone can develop into lung cancer, the combined effects of both cigarettes and asbestos fibers greatly increase the risk. A smoker with heavy occupational exposure to asbestos may have up to 90 times more risk of contracting lung cancer than a worker who doesn't smoke. A person who quits smoking can cut his or her chance of getting lung cancer in half in just 5 years by giving up smoking now. Another form of cancer caused by inhaling asbestos fiber is called malignant mesothelioma. It is almost always fatal, usually within 6 months of diagnosis. Asbestos fibers can migrate from the lungs and embed themselves in the pleura, soft membranes that line the chest cavity, lungs, and diaphragm. This causes severe damage to the surrounding tissues, and the lining of the pleura may become thickened. Unfortunately, there are no early warning signs that asbestos is damaging your body. Effects often do not appear for 20 to 40 years after the first exposure. This is why your best bet is to avoid exposure to asbestos fibers in the first place. You don't have to work directly with asbestos to be at risk. You may be exposed if you work in a building that contains asbestos products. It may be present in your work area, or you might see it as waste from asbestos abatement activity elsewhere in the building. You may even see a regulated area with restricted entry or warning signs indicating the presence of asbestos. Some places where asbestos material may be found include thermal system insulation, TSI, on furnaces, ducts, boilers, and hot water pipes. Sprayed on or troweled on surfacing materials on ceilings and walls. Resilient asphalt and vinyl flooring. Suspended ceiling tiles. Roofing materials. Exterior siding shingles. And sprayed on fireproofing on metal beams and columns. All asbestos-containing materials, or ACM, may release fibers when their matrix is disturbed, but certain types of materials are more easily damaged or suffer more deterioration than others, causing a greater risk of exposure. The tendency for asbestos to break apart and release fibers into the air is called friability. Friable asbestos can be reduced to powder easily just by hand pressure. Sprayed on surfacing materials used on ceilings and walls is a good example of friable asbestos. Thermal system insulation, TSI, on pipes and boilers is so friable it used to be wrapped in painted canvas or coated to keep it in place. Non-friable asbestos materials such as brake shoes, tiles, and shingles are more difficult to break down into powder because their fibers are tightly bonded, but non-friable asbestos can still release hazardous concentrations of fibers if cut, sanded, or broken up. This is especially likely to happen during building renovation or demolition, or when asbestos-containing materials grow old and their matrices begin to break down. EPA standards designate all friable asbestos, as well as those non-friable materials that may release asbestos, as regulated asbestos-containing material, or RACM. Work around these materials must be carefully regulated to protect workers, bystanders, and building occupants. OSHA standards specifically address TSI and surfacing ACM because they are potentially more friable, or more common, and have more maintenance and repair activities performed on them than other kinds of ACM. Keep in mind that every removal activity involving these materials is capable of releasing hazardous levels of fibers. Anytime airborne asbestos concentrations in a location exceed permissible exposure limits, that location becomes a regulated area. These areas are clearly marked with warning signs at all entrances. Some sources of damage resulting in fiber release include impact from other objects, exposure to the elements, vibration, fans and blowers, and chemical spills, leaks, or fumes. To prevent the release of airborne asbestos fibers, always avoid any contact with ACM that disturbs its position, disrupts its matrix or renders it friable, or causes any visible debris from it. Visibly damaged, degraded, or friable ACM in the vicinity is always an indicator that surface debris or dust could be contaminated with asbestos. If you work in a building that contains installed asbestos products, be alert to detect any deterioration of ACM and report it to the building superintendent. OSHA standards require building owners and employers maintain records of the presence, location, and quantity of ACM in the workplace, and must inform employees who perform housekeeping activities in these areas. Notification methods may include warning signs, warning labels, and material safety data sheets, or MSDS. Warning signs are placed at all entrances to asbestos work areas regulated by the OSHA and EPA standards. These signs prevent accidental or unauthorized entry. Warning signs or labels are placed on previously installed building materials containing asbestos to alert building occupants or maintenance staff. Warning labels are placed on airtight containers of asbestos waste before they are transported for disposal. Manufacturers of new asbestos-containing products provide material safety data sheets advising workers of specific hazards. Before using such a product, always look at its MSDS. Asbestos-free products developed to replace ACM, such as pipe insulation, are marked with gold flakes or special paint, or stenciled with the words asbestos-free. If you work in a public or commercial building that contains installed asbestos products, you should know whether you're exposed to asbestos. If you don't work directly with asbestos, there are some simple steps you can take to guard against accidental exposure to asbestos fibers. First, never hang things from insulated pipes or otherwise cut through pipe insulation, and never drill holes or hammer nails in ceilings or surfaced walls to hang plants or pictures. Make sure curtains, drapes, and blinds are installed in such a way that they don't damage any possible ACM. When moving furniture, be careful not to scrape flooring, walls, or ducts, since this could release friable asbestos fibers from their matrices. Don't remove ceiling tiles, light fixtures, or ventilation system filters, and never shake the filters to remove dust. Be aware of proper asbestos waste disposal procedures and heed the labels on asbestos products or asbestos waste that warn against causing dust and breathing airborne fibers. Don't dust moldings or other surfaces, sweep up debris, or use ordinary vacuums in areas that may be contaminated with asbestos waste. And most important, if you find any material that you suspect may contain asbestos, notify your employer. OSHA standards specify basic housekeeping controls and work practices to reduce asbestos exposure caused by custodial operations. Airborne asbestos dust that collects on surfaces can cause high exposure levels when stirred up. If your duties require you to perform maintenance and custodial activities in areas where asbestos fibers may have settled, you must follow these OSHA housekeeping requirements. Keep all surfaces near installed asbestos products as free as possible of dust and debris. Clean up all spills and sudden releases of ACM as soon as possible. Large cleanups may require additional specific training, however. Never use compressed air to clean surfaces contaminated with asbestos. Always use special asbestos vacuums equipped with high-efficiency particulate air or HEPA filters and empty them in a manner that minimizes the re-entry of airborne fibers into the workplace. Never shovel, dry sweep, or use other dry cleanup methods for asbestos debris unless vacuuming or soap and water cleaning methods are not feasible. Dispose of all waste, scrap, debris, bags, containers, equipment, and clothing contaminated with asbestos in sealed, impermeable bags or containers. Make sure the bags and containers are properly labeled. To prevent the release of asbestos fibers from asbestos-containing flooring materials, OSHA standards also list specific housekeeping requirements for their care. Never sand or scrape asphalt or vinyl flooring. Strip floor finishes only by appropriate wet methods using low abrasion pads at speeds lower than 300 RPM. Never burnish or dry buff asbestos-containing flooring unless it has sufficient finish so that the pad can't contact the bare floor. And remember, never dust, dry sweep, or use a regular vacuum on any type of floor surface in areas that contain TSI, surfacing ACM, or visibly deteriorated asbestos products of any kind. Many buildings that contain installed asbestos products are still being used safely and with proper control measures and work practices may continue to present little or no risk for years to come. If you're notified you may be working near asbestos products, it is your responsibility to pay attention to asbestos warning signs and follow your employer's safety practices. Heed the labels on asbestos products or asbestos waste that warn against causing dust and breathing airborne fibers. Avoid disturbing any building materials that might contain asbestos. Use good housekeeping practices to reduce or prevent your exposure to asbestos. And one other thing. Don't forget that one of the best ways to reduce the risk of harmful health effects from asbestos is to stop smoking. If you smoke, your employer can provide you with information about free programs that will help you quit. Employee training is a vital part of any successful asbestos awareness program. If you work near installed asbestos products, this video has provided the basic information you need to protect yourself against unnecessary exposure. If you work directly with asbestos, however, you will need additional information to meet OSHA training requirements for safe handling and exposure control. But in any case, being aware of potential asbestos hazards and using approved work practices will help keep you safe on the job.